Chapter 9. When Time Moves Again. The white was not light so much as a thing that wanted to be everything at once. It arrived without sound. No trumpet, no warning. Only a vast, consuming brightness that filled Ava's vision like a fistful of snow. For an instant she felt the world contract to the size of a single held breath, then expand until there was too much of everything. Heat and pressure and the memory of a sound like a bell being struck inside her chest. Her knees hit pavement with a ragged, indecent noise. The street smelled of dust and burnt ozone and the particular metallic tang of things that had nearly been unmade. For one impossible second she could not remember where she was. Then the city rushed back in, receding and reforming like something that had been exhaled after being held too long. She sat up reflexively, palms pressed to the ground. Her hands were filthy. Her gloves lay crumpled a few feet away, caught under a piece of twisted metal that had not been there before. Around her, the world fluttered like a film reel attempting to correct itself. Seconds that had been frozen now blurred in motion, people gasping in unison as lungs found air again, a dozen delayed screams snapping into being like an orchestra starting at the same conductor's cue. Ava's first clear thought was that her heart felt impossibly full, too full for her ribs to contain. It was as if the seconds they had been given and the seconds they had stolen had layered into her chest and would not fit. She pushed herself to her feet. There he was. Eli lay on the asphalt a few yards away, a human shape among the chaos, and for a breath she believed with the ferocity of someone who had only just chosen hope that he would stir. He did not. Not at first. Paramedics, real riotous in their living motion, rushed past her, their movements hurried and human and rough and alive. Someone shouted coordinates. Sirens wailed in a different key from the one Ava had known in the frozen city. This was the sound of time making up for itself, as if it had decided to say everything at once. Ava pushed through a crowd, breathless, the air thick with the smell of scorched material and the copper of blood. Her hands hovered over Eli's still body like a priest over a relic. He was warm beneath her palms, not the ghost warm of the frozen second, but hot and yielding, with the give of someone who had bled and been bled into. "Clear," she shouted, automatic, professional. "Check for airway." Fingers moved, a medic's voice said. "Pulse faint. Shallow." They worked with the furious competence that comes from repeated practice. Chest compressions began, a metronome of insistence. Ava's training took over in the way a muscle remembers a dance it has performed 1,000 times. Assess, compress, ventilate, for access, medicate. There was a vicious, beautiful rhythm to it. The world shaking, people moving, the attempt to stitch a life back together. Time, she learned, is not a thing you turn on politely. It returned screaming. She saw the child, small, hair matted with dust, eyes wide and alive, cradled in the arms of a nurse who had arrived with the second wave of responders. The child breathed, coughed, then screamed, an animal sound of indignation at having been briefly plucked from the edge of the world. Someone placed a blanket around him. Someone else checked his small limbs. He was crying in the way of the living, and the noise cleaved at Ava in a way she could not name. They worked on Eli until the two of them blurred in a haze of compressions and life-saving techniques, and the inexorable collapse of the place that had held them like a fragile thought. For a while the only sounds that existed were the ordered noises of the medics doing what they could. Ava's hands moved like an instrument she no longer questioned. Compressions, ventilations, command to the team to prepare for transport. And then his chest gave a last, uncooperative shudder. "Time of death," a doctor said quietly into a tablet. numbers registering as if to anchor a life in an administrative ledger. Ava heard it and felt something inside her tilt, an old familiar gravity she had promised herself she would never fall under again. The room of motion around her kept moving, the medics packing, lifting, stabilizing, carrying away. People yelled into radios, sorted the living from the dead, attended to the living with a barrage of tender brutality. Eli's face angled up as they zipped him into a stretcher. Ava leaned over and kissed his forehead, not a grand gesture, but something intimate and small and final. It tasted of smoke and dust and the salt of her tears. He was still warm beneath her lips. She whispered into his hair a confession she had not planned to say aloud. "You were not a sacrifice. You were everything." A sob tore through her, bigger than grief, braver than blame. It was not a cry of guilt. It was a cry opened by love. The city swirled around her in renewed chaos. Traffic snarled into emergency lanes, radios spat out dispatches, strangers lifted strangers from the wreckage, hands met in quick and competent alliances. She followed when Eli was loaded into the ambulance. She rode with him, leaning over the gurney, eyes on the contours of his face, memorizing what remained. The paramedic beside her, in the same job, the same heartbeat, the same world, said, in a voice that acknowledged both the small miracle and the cost, "You played a role here, ma'am. We couldn't have done it without you." Ava arched her neck and met his eyes. "I didn't save him," she said, voice small but sharp. "I didn't." The words were true and she could not deny their hardness. But the paramedic, seasoned, careful, reached out and squeezed her hand. "You held him," he said. "You chose him." The ambulance wheeled into a hospital that smelled like bleach and fluorescent remorse. Inside the emergency room, the work continued, a blur of triage, interventions, triage again. The child who had been saved, because someone had run into a blast, pulled him out, given him a future, shivered under a blanket, eyes rolling, then searching, and finally pinning upon Ava a fierce, ineradicable gratitude. The boy's mother, smeared with dust and tears and disbelief, caught Ava's hand and held on like a lifeline. "You kept him alive," the woman whispered, incredulity and thanks braided together. Ava wanted to protest, to tell her about the second that had been stolen and the man who had held the world open, but she swallowed everything down and let the woman's gratitude rest in her like a warm, undeserved cloak. 4 days, weeks after, news crews varnished the scene with their own version of events. Scientists and officials attempted to translate the impossible into phrases. Temporal anomaly, superposition event, localized chronal imprint. There were press conferences where faces that had never looked at one another before tried to explain themselves. Questions were asked into microphones. Answers, rudimentary and trembling, attempted to stitch a narrative. A meteor or an atmospheric event interacting with a city's infrastructure to create a localized imprint of the final second before a catastrophic impact. The words felt like attempts to keep a building from falling by naming the stones. Ava did not watch the broadcasts much. Not because she wanted to hide, but because the truths there were ugly and flat where hers was jagged and raw. In the quiet after the waves of rescue and the media, she processed the loss in other ways. She spent nights at the hospital sorting through reports, reading charts that made the man she loved a collection of facts. She spoke with chaplains and the child's mother, and with Eli's comrades who came in with hollow eyes. Sometimes, in a wash of exhaustion, she imagined him back in the frozen second, Eli running, shoulder forward, the child balanced at his hip. She imagined him smiling in a private way that the camera could not capture. smiling because he had done what he needed to do. The image did not make pain less. It made it different. She felt pride that cut and then comfort that soothed. She went back to work when she could. The ambulance smelled the same and different, the same antiseptic, the same bruised upholstery, but now populated by a woman who had been shown the cost of holding on too tightly. She treated patients with an added softness, as if each person was both present and also the last of something she might not be able to keep. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were alert. Her voice held a new patience, the kind that had touched someone and then let them go with love, not with a cruel lie that she could keep them safe forever. Weeks later, on a night that had reacquainted itself with ordinary, Ava found herself walking home alone beneath a moon that seemed too knowing. Her steps took her through the park where the city had once been suspended. It seemed ridiculous to look for relics, to hope for ghosts. But memories are tenacious comedians. They pop up when you least request them. At the park's edge, she paused where a lamppost had once rendered a tableau of frozen banalities. A single maple tree reached its fingers across the path. She stopped and looked up. There it was, a solitary leaf suspended in the air above the path. No chain, no hook, nothing to hold it, frozen so delicately as to seem deliberate. For a long moment she thought the world was playing some cruel trick. Then the leaf trembled, as if deciding whether to fall, and drifted down onto the path as naturally as any leaf in autumn. Ava laughed then, unexpected and raw. The sound startled her. It was relief and grief braided together. She felt ridiculous and light and heartbreakingly alive. She touched her throat where the scar of their farewell had been carved, and she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Gratitude. For the seconds given. For the seconds chosen. For the way love can be both a shelter and a wound and, if you let it, a reason to keep walking forward. As the clock in her phone ticked toward midnight, Ava continued her walk, carrying both the heft of what she had lost and the strange luminous knowledge that some choices are made for love, and that to love is to risk losing the one you give everything to. But loss had not broken her. It had reshaped her. She would return to the ambulance when duty called. She would tend the living with renewed tenderness. She would tell the boy's mother again and again that her son had been held in a moment when the world forgot to move, and that someone ran into that impossible light and made sure the child had a tomorrow. The leaf lay on the path, whole and untroubled, and Ava, who had once believed herself defined by what she couldn't save, walked past it and kept her shoulders straight. She felt a hand-shaped absence beside her, and she carried it everywhere the way one carries an heirloom. Fragile, precious, absolutely true. Chapter 10. 1 second forever. In the months that followed, time returned to Ava the way a tide returns to a quiet shore. Cautiously at first, almost shy, as if unsure whether it was welcome. She learned to live inside a world that breathed again, though every inhale carried the ghost of the second she had once chosen to release. The city repaired itself slowly. Buildings were rebuilt. Streets were patched. The scorch marks left by the explosion were scrubbed clean or painted over. But there were places that still felt like seams in reality. Corners where the air hummed faintly or where light bent in a way the eye couldn't quite explain. Ava avoided those places at first. Hurt too much to remember. But healing, she would learn, was not about avoiding the pain. It was about letting it stay with tenderness. The foundation. The idea came to her quietly, in the middle of a sleepless night. A foundation for injured servicemen and families of soldiers lost in the line of duty. A place where people like Eli could be honored not just as casualties, but as human beings who carried impossible burdens. She named it the Donovan Initiative, for those who run toward the light. The first time she said the name aloud, her throat tightened, but she kept speaking. Ava organized fundraisers, reached out to veteran networks, met with trauma psychologists and military families. The work was exhausting in a way that felt righteous, like lifting something heavy not because it was required, but because it deserved to be lifted. People asked why she cared so much. She only ever said, "Because someone taught me what courage looks like." She never spoke his name publicly. She didn't need to. The work was his. The opening of her heart. Ava changed in small, gentle increments, subtle shifts that only close friends noticed. She laughed more easily. She lingered in conversations instead of retreating behind clipped professionalism. She let people sit beside her in silence. And she let herself love again, not with the frantic desperation of someone afraid to lose, but with the steadiness of someone who finally understood that love is not a chain, but a door. She kept Eli with her in quiet ways, in the necklace she wore under her shirt, in the way she pressed her palm to her chest when she was overwhelmed, in the choice she made every day to keep moving, no longer out of duty, but out of devotion. The place where time once stood still. On the anniversary of the explosion, Ava walked through the part of the city that had once been folded into a single unending moment. The street was busy now. Cars honking, children laughing, the kind of noise that once would have felt like an intrusion. Now it felt like proof of life. The intersection was just pavement again. No cracks of white light. No trembling air. No ghosts of the paused world. A maple tree had taken root near the sidewalk. Its leaves shimmered in the afternoon sun, green and bright and utterly alive. Ava stood beneath it, letting the breeze lift a strand of her hair. She closed her eyes. And the world softened. For a breath, just one. She heard a whisper across the quiet curve of her mind. "I'm still here." In that 1 second. Ava's lips parted, and tears slipped down her cheeks without shame, without apology. She whispered back, voice trembling but steady, "I know." The wind brushed her cheek as if in answer. The smile through tears. She opened her eyes and let herself smile, even as her vision blurred with tears. Not the shattered smile of someone barely holding herself together. Real one. Full one. The kind that carried grief and gratitude in equal measure. Because she had loved him. Because he had loved her. Because she had let him go. And because she now understood. Some lives fill decades. Some fill only a second. And some rare ones fill eternity in the space of a single held breath. The soft cliffhanger. Ava turned to leave, ready to return to her shift at the ambulance bay, ready to walk back into a world that needed hands like hers. But as she reached the corner, she froze. Just for an instant. A silhouette stood at the far end of the block, broad-shouldered, familiar, still as a memory-given form. Her breath caught. The figure lingered, then stepped back behind the building's edge, and disappeared. Ava didn't chase it. Didn't call after it. She just pressed a hand to her heart and smiled, soft and aching and unbelievably warm. Time moved forward. The world kept breathing. But somewhere, in the place where 1 second had stretched into an eternity, Someone was still watching over her.